Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today we have a special guest, Anjilee Ferguson, here with us talking about her new book. She is an author and she reached out to me about doing this podcast episode. And I'm so glad that you did, Anjilee, but I'm going to have you introduce yourself in just a minute. But I just want to state that she's an author, an entrepreneur, and also a peer mentor supervisor. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about her first book on how she's able to help others in their relationship journeys. Hey parents, welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. Do you want to raise your kids better and have a stronger marriage? Are you up late at night researching marriage and parenting tools and self-care tips? Do you start each day hoping for deeper connections and less chaos, but it ends with family arguments and going 12 different directions again? My name's Kendra, wife, mom, therapist, and growth enthusiast. It wasn't until I discovered how to fulfill my unmet needs that I was finally able to show up as my best self as a spouse and parent. I realized that by meeting my needs, I could more fully meet the needs of my family with more energy and less resentment. In this podcast, I teach parents skills like boundary setting, prioritizing personal needs, communication, and claiming ownership. Just like my clients, you'll be shocked by the improvement in your marriage, parenting, and personal life when you focus on fulfilling your important unmet needs. Ready to prioritize yourself so you can quit mentally throat punching people? Then grab those earbuds and head outside, and let's walk and talk. So, Anjilee, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Kendra. I'm really excited to talk to your audience. Yeah, so when I was 25, I was in the single game and just kind of frustrated with the dating scene and all the pressure and stigma that went along with it. And so as I was dating and having these horrible dating experiences, I was writing them down and reflecting on what I learned from all of them, because I was like, this would make a good book one day. And then maybe someone can have like a guidebook to help them through the things that I had to experience, but, be that much further ahead on the journey. And so it's really exciting that I can now add author to my resume along with all the other things I've done. I kind of joke and say that I'm a jack of all trades, like a master of none, because I've done a lot of different things. Tried my hand at, starting a business. It was an online school for grades 6 through 12. And then I've worked at the university level and, have a degree in journalism, but I've never worked as a journalist. And so it's just kind of funny the path that life has taken me on. But yeah, I'm just really excited to share my story of like what I learned and how people can make the most of the experiences with what life kind of hands them.
Absolutely. And that sounds like an incredible book. And I'm so excited to pick your brain a little bit about that. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
So in your book about helping others, you said it was about helping others in their relationships or their relationship journey. What key insights or strategies do you offer people seeking to find maybe greater fulfillment in their relationships specifically?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, it's probably going to vary for everybody. It's kind of a trial and error of testing what works for you. But I think for me specifically, gratitude was just a huge part of that journey. Because I think that as a society, we're so focused on this, I'll be happy when mindset, that we don't really sit there and think about, oh, but look at what I do have. I have all these great things. Using gratitude as a healing tool, right? Like, I think that was huge for me as I was taking time to heal and grieve, because I also got divorced and then was back in the dating scene, right? And so I think gratitude was a huge part of that journey to just heal the parts of myself that I had experienced, recognizing that I was good enough, even though my path didn't maybe look like the typical path that other people have. And I think gratitude is just appreciating the things that you have so that you can show up as the best version of yourself. Because ultimately in a relationship, you can't fully love someone until you love yourself. And so I think it's appreciating the things that you do have and just recognizing that, hey, I have a different path and that's okay, that it doesn't look like everybody else's.
Yes, I love that. I have a different path. And there's no shame in that. It's completely okay. But it's when you focus on the path of others and compare yourself, that's really when that heartache comes, or that shame, that guilt, that sadness. You talked about dating in general is hard, right? But then you went on and then you divorced. You talked about how that was another thing maybe you didn't anticipate. And still, through all of that, finding that gratitude as a tool to help you show up and be the best version of yourself, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting, because along with like divorce comes all the typical feelings of bitterness, frustration, wasted time, all the what ifs. But at the same time, I was also living in this space of gratitude and recognizing all the good things and feeling peace. And I was like, that is so weird that these two can coexist. And so I think for people out there that are maybe in that rut or feeling like I'm just stuck, I don't want to start a relationship, or my relationship is stagnant, like start with gratitude and you'll be amazed at the shift that can happen.
Oh, that's amazing. And then also, I'm not completely sure in this book, I have not read it yet, but is this also for people that are in a relationship or just looking to begin a relationship?
Yeah, I think there's applicable points for everybody, right? Because like I said, I talk about what I learned from the dating experiences I had, what I learned from divorce, and then what I learned from being remarried and in a healthy relationship. And so it kind of covers all of those stages of like, hey, learning to love yourself, showing gratitude, recognizing the lessons in the setbacks, right? Because we're all going to have setbacks. That's just inevitable. That's life. And so I think it is applicable for anybody at any life stage of just recognizing, hey, even though this is happening and I wasn't expecting it, here's how I can make the most of it and come out stronger as a better person on the other side.
That's incredible. Absolutely. So I'm curious, with that in mind, can you share any experiences or challenges you faced on your journey towards that greater fulfillment and how you overcame them, especially when it comes to this book?
Yeah, for sure. I think a big underlying message was that, that whole, and I feel like women especially fall victim to that mentality of, I'm just not good enough. I'm not enough. No matter what I do, I'm never going to be good enough, right? Kind of that dip in self-esteem, and then, the ebbs and flows of how it always is, recognizing our divine nature, our purpose in life. And so, I've never been in the typical stages of life, right? Like I got married older. I still don't have biological children, right? Like my path is not the traditional that everybody experiences. And so for me, the struggle was really like this constant battle that I was just not enough because I didn't look like everybody else and I didn't have what everybody else had. And so for me, that was learning how to be okay with my path. And again, I mentioned gratitude was a huge part of that, but I also went to counseling. And because I'm a writer, journaling worked really well for me. And my book was very therapeutic to write because it helped me heal. Right. And I think it was also just relying on my faith, a lot of prayer and reflection, meditation, just kind of exploring and learning who I was as a person and being okay with who I was as a person, even though I didn't look like so and so that has it all, or my path is totally wildly different, and being okay that like, okay, it might not look this way, but I can still offer this and I still have value outside of this traditional societal norm that everybody expects.
I really appreciate people that speak to those things and being raw and vulnerable about that, because the more that I meet with clients, the more I feel like we're all telling ourselves those things. Like, I don't have value. My path isn't like so and so's. I'm not enough. Even if it's not those words, like
Yeah.
that is the underlying message that we tell ourselves. Like, this is wrong. I'm bad. I'm not enough.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that you're speaking to this right now, but also in this book, that just a couple things that you said. My path is okay. That I don't have to compare. And that you did stuff like counseling, writing a book, relying on your faith and doing that reflection in order to recognize that you still had value, that you are enough. That's so important. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, no problem.
So, do you have any advice that you want to share with listeners who are seeking to improve their relationships and even their life satisfaction?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, again, just thinking back to my book and writing the process of how it was, I think if I could go back in time to like first time I was single, I would focus on how I could be a better person. I think there was so much pressure to like find your person that the focus wasn't on, well, but how can I cultivate and become the person that I want to attract? Right? Like if I want this out of a person, what am I doing to be that person? How can I improve myself so that I can attract what I naturally want in my life? And so if you're single, if you're in that phase, I would say just focus on becoming the best version of yourself, right? Like recognize your weaknesses and improve on those, but also explore who you are as a person. Try new hobbies, right? I remember when I was single, I got wildly outside of my comfort zone and joined an all girls cover band. And it was a lot of fun, right? Like it was just something new and fun to try. And so, yeah, just take the opportunities to become the better, version of yourself. And then if you are married or in a serious committed relationship, find ways to serve your person, right? Like I think there's no better way to connect with your partner, your spouse, than to serve them and just really find out what their love language is and serve them in that way that connects for them, right? Because then that leads to just greater satisfaction because you're connected to your person. There's nothing worse than being in a relationship and just feeling like you're roommates and that you're on different paths. And so I think staying connected to them by serving them, recognizing their love language, doing fun things together just leads to greater connection, which by default then creates greater life satisfaction because you're feeling like, hey, I have a person, I have a place. I know I can rely on this person and they can rely on me. And it's kind of that two-way street instead of just feeling like you're isolated or alone on an island.
That's great advice. There's a couple things that you spoke to that I like. First of all, I love your focus on becoming the best version of yourself so that you can attract that same type of person, that same light. And I remember like college, like so many different roommates just going so out of their way to be whatever that person wanted to attract them and just not having that strong sense of self and canceling all their plans, doing whatever they can. And it ended up being so unattractive to the other people that they were drawn to that they were overlooked or they moved on because they didn't have that confidence, that sense of self. They just were so worried about the other person instead of improving who they were. And I think that is so important. So I'm glad you shared that. But then also, you talked about serving your spouse. And I've been thinking a lot about this because as I speak on the podcast, marriage is hard. It is,
Yeah.
it is not easy. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. Same with parenting, but also the most rewarding. And I've thought a lot about that. Like it's so easy to kind of neglect that relationship, especially as you have other responsibilities that take away from those things. And I have found that I haven't been serving him like I did in the beginning of our marriage. So I decided for 1 year, I'm going to keep track, like a record of like a way that I served him or what I love about him throughout the whole year.
That's awesome.
And then share that with him. Yeah, just to not even so much for him, although I know he'll appreciate it, but what better way to honor a 20-year anniversary than to spend a full year in intentional service? And I want to experiment with that and see how that goes and then what that does to improve our marriage relationship. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for speaking to that as well, because that is super important.
Well, and I love that idea. I think that's a great idea of just, being intentional. I think that's a good word, right? Because unfortunately, we just kind of, the people that are closest to us sometimes are the ones that don't get our best selves.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, right? Because we're burnt out. We just got home from work. We're frustrated, whatever. And so I think bringing the intentionality back into it is a huge part of, just strengthening any relationship, even if it's like a parent-child relationship or like aunt to niece or nephew, brother, sister, parent, all of the relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you have noticed that as well. That's like a common thing that we just give people that we love our leftovers. And it's so hard to remember not to,
Yes, it is.
to conserve some for those beautiful people in our lives. Anjilee, is there anything else in your book that really was helpful for you in your journey to improving your relationships that you'd like to speak to today before I move on to something else?
Yeah, I covered a lot of elements. I got really raw and vulnerable with the book. And it was funny because as I got the contract to publish, I was like, ooh, do I really want to sign this? Like, this is going to be out there. Like, people are going to know my story and what I experienced, right? And so I think for me, it was just kind of, so many elements that I've already kind of mentioned, but another overarching theme was just, yeah, to recognize that it's okay that I was different, but also within that to recognize how maybe culture played a big part of it and how we can kind of overcome that, right? Like I grew up in the LDS faith. And so there's a lot of, stigmas around like, oh, marry a returned missionary or get married young and pop out all these kids, right? And it
Mhm.
seemed, for me at least, that was like the only question that people seemed to care about.
Right.
And I would get that question all the time. So whenever I didn't have a boyfriend or I wasn't progressing forward, I just felt like a failure in life, even though I had graduated college by the time I was 20.
Oh, wow.
And nobody seemed to care about that, right? Because it wasn't this like traditional path. And so I think that's kind of just the learning of recognizing that, hey, we all have our different strengths. We all have our different paths. And I just wanted to share my story so that other people that are experiencing it or have felt the heartache of, the comparison of, oh, I'm the oldest of 4 children and yet I didn't get married first and I didn't have kids first and I didn't do this first, right? And just know that they're not alone, because I think it is a lonely journey when you're told your whole life, like, find your person, build a family. And it's like, okay, but what happens when my best intentions don't work out that way? Or what happens when I thought I find my person and then they discard me like I'm nothing, right? Like, how do you pick up the pieces of your life? And so there's complexities all throughout the book of just like navigating all the feelings that go along with it. Like I mentioned, the frustration, the healing, the peace, just kind of all the different things. And really, I think just being able to find a silver lining in all of it, right? Like I laugh as I was like editing the book multiple times. I was like, man, how did I find the silver lining when I was in these moments? Because reading it
Absolutely.
again was kind of like, holy cow, I survived that. But
Mhm.
like, yeah, finding that silver lining and recognizing that like, there's a plan. It's going to work out. It's going to be okay. And maybe I just needed this experience to grow and become the better version of myself.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's often in those journeys that are not the ones that we think, the meandering, crazy path that goes all over the place, that we emerge so much stronger and more beautiful than we ever would have thought. And yet the path we would have chose for ourselves is the one that's straight up to the top, right? No
Yes.
meandering.
Yeah, I do remember saying that a lot. I was like, I'm just so sick of this feeling so hard. Like, when is it going to feel easy again? Right.
Right. Yeah.
And then you look back and you're like, oh, but look at how I grew. Like I learned from the hard. It wasn't like, it's so interesting to me how trials and struggles can ultimately work out for our good. But when
Mhm.
we're in it, we're just like, okay, I'm over this. Let's move on.
Definitely. Oh, there's so much that you spoke to just then that I really loved. And I especially appreciate your authenticity again. Just that vulnerability and be willing to share your journey that doesn't look like others, maybe. But I think that's what's so appealing about it. There are so many people out there that don't get married right away, or they don't have children for a long time or ever, or divorce. And there is so much stigma or shame or cultural expectation that can really drag you down if you
Yeah,
don't choose to almost like fall forward or recognize it as your unique path that is okay and it's beautiful for you and there's purpose in it.
for
That's
sure.
so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
What is the name of your book, by the way? I don't think you shared it.
Oh yeah, that would be helpful, right? Um, so it's called Yes, No, Maybe So, a comedy of dating, divorce, and devotion.
I love that title. I remember chuckling when I saw it. I was like, that's a great title. I love that.
So yeah, I share the horrors of dating and then, the stress of divorce and then finding myself again. And so you're just with me along the whole journey from like high school till now. So
Oh, I love it. I'm excited to read it. I wish I would have had time to read it before this interview, but I will read it afterwards. So I'll
sounds
check it
good.
out. I'm curious if you have a closing quote or even a mantra that you'd like to leave with us before we end today.
Yeah. So something I think that helped me along this path of just like discovering who I was and recognizing how to become a better version of myself. I call myself a recovering perfectionist because my whole life that kind of dictated a lot of what I did, right? Like perfectionism. And so once I was working for a podcaster and she said the phrase, done is better than perfect. And I loved that because I realized, yeah, I'm never going to be perfect in this life. Like that is not going to happen. And so how can I be okay with showing up the best that I can, even though it might not be perfect?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think for anyone listening, like give yourself grace along the journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doing your best is better than perfect. We're not going to be the perfect wife, sister, friend, girlfriend, whatever. Like it's just not going to happen. And so being okay with that and, recognizing that we're all just trying to figure it out. None of us have all the pieces perfectly fit together and just being okay with the journey. Right. I think we all struggle with perfectionism from time to time, but just like done is better than perfect. I did my best today and that's enough.
That is a great spot to end. I will say to that too, that there's a podcaster that I followed too, and she said, just put out your B work. Just move forward with that momentum. And I was at first appalled because as a perfectionist at one point myself, I was like, I can do A work. As a matter of fact, I can do A plus work. I will not put B work. But you get stuck in the weeds when you're always looking for A plus work. And that is focusing way too much on what others want to instead of what resonates. And I do love that. Done is better than perfect. Put out that B work, just letting go. It's that acceptance and letting go. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. And also, where can we find you? And tell us a little bit about the giveaway that we talked about too.
Yeah. So for anyone listening, I would love to give away a signed copy of my book for you to read. So just go ahead and follow me on Instagram. It's Anjilee.Ferguson. And then when I share this episode on my Instagram, just comment and follow, and then I will pick a winner. Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active. I feel like Facebook is kind of like gone by the wayside a little bit.
I know. I have felt that recently too, where it was the thing, and now it doesn't feel quite so much like the thing. Anjilee, tell us how you spell your name because they may not know how to spell
true.
it.
Very good point. So yeah, so Anjilee is A-N as in Nancy, J-I-L-E-E .Ferguson, and Ferguson is F-E-R-G-U-S-O-N.
Awesome.
Have a fun name where I have to spell both, right?
I know. I married my maiden name was Smith, and I never had to spell my name until now. And I'm like, oh, if I could go back to Smith.
There you go. Yeah, I'm used to it. I've gotten lots of interesting spellings for my name over the years.
Well, thank you so much, Anjilee. I really appreciate you coming on and telling us about your relationship journey. And I am excited to read this comedy. I love good humor, and it sounds like it will be that. But the message behind it, too, is just focus on becoming the best version of yourself and just having that gratitude and embracing your own story and your own path in order to know that you are enough. And I really appreciate that message and the ripples that you're putting out there to change lives. So I'm excited. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. This was great. I appreciate it.
Of course. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.